Okay, well, as Laurie said, let me back up. Our topic is Consolidate to Microsoft Azure Active Directory to improve security and reduce costs. So we're going to be taking a look at Azure Active Directory as an identity solution and how it can help your organization to better secure your environment and also provide a better user experience to increase end user productivity. A little quick background on Oxford Computer Group for those that may not be aware. We are a Microsoft partner, have been for quite some time. And we do specialize in identity and access management solutions, identity governance, device management, security, among other things. We have a 17-year track record of deploying identity and hybrid identity solutions, having been the go-to partner around Microsoft Identity Manager, formerly known as Forefront Identity Manager, which is still quite in use throughout enterprises today. But we have been working around Azure Active Directory and the various components of it, well, since its inception. And I've been with Oxford for almost 5 years, and that has been my primary focus around the enterprise mobility and security suite and helping customers onboard to Azure Active Directory. So we'll begin our discussion with talk briefly about the shifting world. Many businesses are embarking on digital transformations, and many more traditional companies have seen the need to keep up with their competitors and provide a better customer experience. They do this by moving forward with initiatives like developing their own software and selling their products online. And along with these new technology capabilities, the very way people work has changed, and of course, that has been dramatically emphasized this year as we battle and go through this pandemic. And we know before the pandemic, remote work was already here. Many companies had been shifting to a remote and mobile workforce. The mantra of cloud first, mobile first, which was adopted by CEO of Microsoft when he came on board back in 2013, has also been a mantra of many other organizations as well, to shift to a cloud first, mobile first type of architecture, because it makes sense. It makes companies more nimble, quicker to respond to their competitors and to shifting trends. But along with that, many organizations must develop new capabilities and break down data silos. Data and information are the lifeblood of any digital transformation. And of course, with that, we see increases in cyber criminal activity. And to that end, traditional security approaches have failed. The hardened perimeter of your network firewalls, the concept of a privileged corporate network is now at best a psychological security blanket, but it will not hold. And just this past week, we've seen the results of that, even with this SolarWinds attack that has left many Fortune 500 businesses and government sector reeling as how that attack was carried out. Very sophisticated, advanced persistent threats there. These siloed on-premise tools and data sets lack visibility, correlation, automation, and paradoxically, the more tools you have does not mean you are safer. In some respects, it can mean you're less secure because with that not only comes a cost, but you require specialized personnel in order to manage all of these siloed tools. Addition, as the governments try to keep up, regulatory rules are constantly changing and the cost of compliance is increasing as well. Well, with all these realities which existed prior to the pandemic, on top of that, there are a set of other challenges and complexities. Many organizations across many industries, such as retail, manufacturing, defense industrial base, have seen an increase in economic uncertainties. And again, very true in this year, 2020, as a result of the pandemic. And so that has created significant economic uncertainties. For some, It's presenting an existential struggle to continue to exist. In the retail sector, we see many stores, malls closing, manufacturing concerned with their supply chain. So many are hearing the saying of do more with less, and everyone is therefore under pressure to look for ways to trim existing budgeted initiatives as well as future plans. The pandemic has also increased cybersecurity risks as bad actors are preying on the transition to remote work. As mentioned before, the disclosure of the SolarWinds breach and how it's affected so many companies and government departments brings that to light. With people, data, and apps more distributed than ever, the risk of a breach increases, and so do the costs. Taken together, all these trends we've outlined represent a shared challenge to IT security. Organizations find themselves responsible for protecting a crisscrossing web of technologies, many of which they may not own outright or even manage. With so many devices, different user groups, and so much corporate data, the traditional perimeter-based security model simply cannot keep up with the sophistication and the scale of today's threats. Again, we can no longer believe that everything behind the corporate firewall is safe. Layered on top of that, already complex landscape is yet another complex mix of security solution providers responsible for addressing a particular security need. I'm sure you've all been here where you have a bevy of security solution providers trying to set up a meeting with you to tell you why their tool is going to solve that particular issue that you have. And when you look across the various surveys exploring exactly how many security tools are being used in large organizations today, the results are somewhat distressing. They range anywhere between 50 and 70 different security tools that large companies use. The industry has been focused on best of breed for quite some time. That is, for every security need, you are required to purchase the best of breed security solution. Unfortunately, as many have come to learn, we simply cannot keep creating more silos, requiring specific skill sets that are not inherently designed to integrate with other solutions. On top of that, security teams, especially in today's circumstances, are overwhelmed chasing alerts and traversing from one security product to the next. So a new approach with identity at the center is required. And that's where Microsoft Azure Active Directory comes in. Azure Active Directory is a complete identity and access management solution with integrated security to manage and protect all users and data wherever they may be working from and whatever device that they may be on. In this world, your identity system in the cloud is your control plane that can connect everything, give you visibility to your entire digital estate, ensure that only the right people have the right access to the right resources, and keep the bad players out. Microsoft's Azure Active Directory is a universal identity platform that helps you manage and secure all of your users and external identities and access to all of your apps. Those of you in the audience listening to this presentation, you are leading the digital transformation to help your companies get ready for the opportunities in the cloud era and reinvent the way that we work. And Azure Active Directory, of course, can be a key part of that digital transformation. Azure Active Directory can be regarded as the world's largest cloud identity service. Just looking at some of the numbers, of course, these numbers, as I say these and when they were written a couple months back, obviously have changed, but it gives you an idea of the scale. Azure AD is a truly global identity service that operates at hyperscale. Over 100,000 organizations trust Azure AD as their identity provider. And Microsoft is managing more than 254 million monthly active users with billions of daily authentication requests. And through that, they've been able to learn quite a bit and help further the security aspects of Azure Active Directory. So in our presentation, we're going to be talking about 5 key areas where you can gain benefits of consolidating your identity with Azure Active Directory. We'll discuss identity infrastructure consolidation. So those running on-prem identity solutions, why moving to a cloud-based identity provider makes sense and how it can save you money and efficiencies there. We'll talk about end user productivity improvements from a seamless single sign-on experience, reducing costs by leveraging self-service capabilities such as password reset, how Azure Active Directory helps reduce the risk of data breach, and how you can gain IT efficiency by leveraging Azure Active Directory. The background for a lot of the information that I'm going to be presenting comes from a Forrester study that was commissioned by Microsoft. It was released in August 2020. You can find it at aka.ms/AADTEI. And the objective of the study was to identify the costs, benefit, flexibility, and risk factors that affect the investment decision, that is, of adopting Azure AD as an identity provider in your environment. The subjects in the study, there were 4 real-life organizations of varying sizes that were interviewed from different sectors of the economy to obtain that cost, benefit, and risk data. And then from those interviews and from those companies, in the study, a composite organization was put together based on the characteristics of those organizations. Some of those characteristics are this composite organization. Think of it as the Contoso of the study. Was an organization that had $28 billion in annual revenue, 85,000 employees located over 150 locations globally, 1,000 total applications in the environment. And they did have existing Microsoft licensing, namely Microsoft 365 E3 licensing, which includes Azure AD Premium P1. Some of the features I'll be discussing are available with a Premium P1 or P2 licensing. Of course, the obligatory, your mileage may vary. You have to look at your own organization, see where there are similarities and where you may have to make some adjustments. So our first benefit, infrastructure simplification and consolidation. For many organizations, their identity story looks something like this. They have on-premise Active Directory, which has been in place for 20 years or so. They may already be Office 365 customers and are leveraging Azure Active Directory for single sign-on or perhaps just directly federated from Active Directory Federation services on-prem to Office 365. They may also have a third-party identity as a service solution in the environment to connect either to customer-facing applications, partner applications, or well-known third-party SaaS applications. And they may also be leveraging Active Directory Federation services or another on-prem a third-party identity solution to interface with partners and for perhaps legacy line of business applications. Additionally, with a lot of mergers and acquisition activity, you may have inherited a third-party IDaaS or on-prem identity solution as well. So we often see with that activity a lot of silos and a lot of kind of piecing together the identity picture in these organizations where there could be upwards of 3, 4, even 5 different identity silos in that environment. Well, with Azure Active Directory, you're able to manage all of your apps from one central location. The organizations featured in that study that were investing in Azure AD were aiming to reduce costs and complexity of their existing identity and access management infrastructure that typically included a legacy on-premise presence and SaaS-based solutions managing modern cloud applications. After migrating to Azure AD for identity and access management, these organizations were able to sunset their legacy IAM infrastructure, including physical servers, proxy servers, previous IDaaS solutions, and all of the licensing and auxiliary costs associated with managing the legacy solution, because authentication for all applications, once they consolidated to Azure AD, and these include non-Microsoft apps, were now being managed and secured with Azure Active Directory. Organizations were often leveraging a perpetual license model as well for their legacy on-prem SSO solutions. By adopting Azure AD, they now avoid upgrading that license to stay current with security and new feature updates. In addition to reducing costs, organizations also recognize that their previous identity solutions, both legacy and cloud-based, were not offering the kind of visibility or control necessary to guarantee the security of their app ecosystem. Azure Active Directory also gives the ability to deliver consistent single sign-on experience to your legacy on-premise apps. There is a very rich partner ecosystem with Citrix, F5, Zscaler, and Akamai to allow you to, if you have those devices already in place in your environment, to provide access to legacy on-premise applications, line of business applications that ordinarily would have to be accessed via VPN type solutions. So for users on the road, remote, to gain access to those applications, they may have to be coming through VPN or some sort of EDI solution. But with Azure Active Directory, either with those partners as part of the secure hybrid access suite of products, or with Azure AD App Proxy, which is an agent-based solution running on Windows Server that allows you to connect those on-premise applications to Azure AD and gain all the benefits, the security benefits of Azure AD as well, such as protecting those applications behind your conditional access policies, MFA, blocking legacy authentication protocols. All could be managed directly with Azure Active Directory. And again, you're providing that consistent single sign-on experience to your users. So the end result of this particular benefit, according to the study and according to using that composite organization, organizations that consolidated with Azure Active Directory and sunsetting those on-premise servers and those solutions were and the licensing costs associated with that, after a risk adjustment of 5%, were able to see a 3-year risk-adjusted total present value of $1.9 million in savings in their environments. Certainly some significant amount when you, again, consider that you may be paying for a certain solution twice. If you're using a third-party cloud-based identity provider, and you also have access to Azure Active Directory, that may very well be the case where you're paying for the same solution twice. The next benefit is end user productivity improvements from a seamless SSO experience. So as mentioned, with Azure Active Directory, you can connect your workforce to any app, centralize management from and manage those applications from the cloud. You can streamline that access with single sign-on and improve app discoverability for users, making it easy for them to find the applications that they need to use and make them productive. And contrary to what may still be believed, Azure Active Directory is not just for Office 365. Personally, I still have that conversation with customers believing that Azure Active Directory is only a cloud identity solution for connecting to Exchange Online, SharePoint, Teams, and the rest of the M365 application ecosystem. But in fact, Azure AD is an identity solution not just for Microsoft, not just from Microsoft, but its ability to connect to any app to Azure AD. Now, of course, there are applications in the Azure AD gallery that are sort of been prepared and can be turned on and enabled rather quickly. But it's not limited to just those 4,000 or so applications in the gallery. I've worked with customers where we've taken applications that, as long as they support some type of modern authentication protocol, be that SAML or OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0, that those applications can be connected with Azure Active Directory. So see, there's over 2 million applications that are integrated with Azure AD today, and we've been seeing 100% growth in the last year. Now, when we talk about simplifying an end user experience for app discovery, the My Applications portal. So if you go to myapplications.microsoft.com, if you are currently a Office 365 or Azure AD customer, have it in your environment. This is where you can create a single kind of one-stop shop for your users to go to launch their applications from. I worked with a customer that was using a third-party competitor service that had a similar feature, and when we migrated them to Azure AD, they had about, at the time, 55 applications, various knowledge workers, some first-line workers in their environment. They were in manufacturing. The users essentially did not really even notice much of a difference. They were just more concerned with being able to launch their browser at the start of their day. We enabled seamless single sign-on from their Windows 10 workstations. They launched their browser, they're signed in, they don't have to get prompted for credentials again, and they can launch the applications that they need to get their work done. So based on the study, again, we see that there was a 3-year risk-adjusted present value of $7.1 million saved. Some of the factors here were, again, the number of users based on that composite organization of 85,000 users, and the time saved per week using Azure AD single sign-on. Because you imagine if users do not have all of the friction of having to get prompted for credentials, they may have multiple identities for different applications that they ordinarily would have to try to remember or have jot down and have to be prompted for those credentials repeatedly. By leveraging the single sign-on with Azure AD, they're saving about 10 minutes per week, which of course extrapolates to hours saved per year, and based on the fully loaded average hourly salary for those employees, and the 20% productivity capture, that's where that number of $7.1 million saved over a 3-year period comes from. Another benefit to this is the fact that it also changes the perception of IT in an organization. IT teams usually have a difficult task. They're trying to secure everything in the environment. They're trying to keep things controlled, repeatable, predictable. And because of that, a lot of time IT has to say no. And it's often just viewed as a cost center and not a part of the organization that really adds any value. By enabling single sign-on, it gives users sort of that aha moment, because for users, it shows that IT cares about their productivity. They want them to be productive at the same time keeping the environment secure, and it becomes a tangible improvement, sort of a quick win in the environment. One global IT solutions architect that was interviewed said that even though most users were only saving a couple of minutes per day, from an experience perspective, this was huge. They started to realize that IT isn't all just about restricting and imposing rules, but that IT can actually enable changes that improve their day-to-day experience. And again, personally, I've seen that working with customers, enabling single sign-on in the environment, of how much more productive and happy users are, and happy users are productive users. Our third benefit is we'll discuss is reducing costs by leveraging self-service capabilities such as password reset. So with Azure AD, and this is one of those features that is a premium feature specifically for on-prem to keep the password synchronized on-prem along with the cloud identity. But we know that password resets are usually one of the larger costs associated with running a help desk. Users, because of all the different passwords that they have to try to remember, because of the complexity rules that we've imposed upon them, you try to keep the environment secure, they often forget their passwords. So they call the help desk, and the cost and time was usually very high. One question you can ask yourself and look at your help desk is, how much time are you actually spending on password reset and password changes? In this scenario, we're specifically talking about the ability to reset your password when you forget your password, and Azure AD has that capability. Designed for hybrid environments as well. So if you have Active Directory on-prem and you enable the password write-back functionality within Azure AD Connect, you're able to keep that identity in sync so that their cloud and on-prem passwords remain the same. And again, they don't have to try to remember two different sets of credentials. So we talked about the password write-back. Of course, there's a self-service password change as well, where if they just need to change their password because they've been told that they may have been compromised, they can do that as well. And there's self-service password reset and registration and account unlock as well as part of the solution. And as far as the registration process, if you're enabling MFA in the environment too, there's a now unified registration process where users just need to register one time their verification methods, and they can be used for both self-service password reset and for MFA. A quick look at the architecture. So very simply, the self-service password reset functionality exists in the cloud. For the password write-back, it's simply a checkbox that you turn on that allows Azure AD Connect through a secure TLS tunnel to your tenant to convey the password changes back down to on-prem to Active Directory. And then, of course, if you have Microsoft Identity Manager in your environment, Microsoft Identity Manager can keep that same password synchronized with other on-premise applications that you may be using MIM for provisioning and deprovisioning. On average, there are about 4,000 password resets that we're hitting, that could be hitting a help desk every month on average. This is before investing with Azure AD. The organizations that were surveyed for the study found that within 2 months of deploying self-service password reset, the number of those requests decreased to about 1,000 per month and remained stable, which is a 75% reduction. The average cost for a password reset request, when you're calling to the help desk, it's about $20 per call. So you can see the savings there by enabling SSPR. And again, my experience, whenever we work with customers that have purchased Azure AD Premium licensing, self-service password reset is typically the first one I like to help them deploy because it is what I call the low-hanging fruit, right? It is requires no on-premise infrastructure additional, and it's a few setting changes that you need to make, and you can deploy the solution in a staged with a staged approach to give enough time to test it and to ensure that it's going to meet the needs. And then once ready, it's a matter of really communicating out to your end users, providing some training on how to register and how to leverage the service. And we'll have some links at the end for some of those deployment plans where you can find some good communication tools that you can leverage to communicate to your end users. At the end of the day, you're saving money, you're saving time, you're increasing security because you're making the password reset process even more secure by enabling the self-service features. Additionally, some IT admin benefits. With self-service password reset, it's a lower really total cost of ownership. Once deployed in the environment, it kind of just runs itself. Does not need a lot of, once users are trained on how to use it, does not require a lot of hand holding. And I mentioned before, increases security, and you can have that granular rollout. Enabling self-service password reset in our composite company, based on the interviews that were conducted, saw a present value, a 3-year risk-adjusted present value of $1.7 million saved in those organizations. Again, just based on the number of password reset requests that were coming in per month at $20 per request, and the reduction of those requests, yearly the costs were reduced by about almost $700,000. Reducing risk of data breach, of course, a topic on many minds. And Azure AD, of course, can help with this. Azure AD, of course, as a cloud identity solution, is accessible from anywhere. But what if an access attempt is performed from a network location that is not under your control of the IT department? A username and password combination might be good enough as proof of identity for access attempts from your corporate network. But what if you demand stronger proof of identity for access attempts that are initiated from other unexpected countries or regions of the world? And what if you wanted to block access attempts from those locations? Well, Azure AD, with its conditional access capabilities, provides those mechanisms. Conditional access is a capability of Azure AD that enables you to enforce controls on the access to applications in your environment based on specific conditions from a central location. Other products may refer to as contextual based or secure adaptive access. In Azure AD, it's known as conditional access, which becomes that policy engine for helping you determine how users will access the information, whether it will detect a risk based on where they're signing in from, detecting things such as impossible travel, and then being able to make intelligent decisions from those signals. And that's what this slide is talking about. We want to make sure that only the right people with the right resources on secure devices can access your data from anywhere. And conditional access is that intelligent policy engine that's built for that challenge. You can configure your conditional access policies based on, again, the devices that users are using, whether they are, for instance, Azure Active Directory joined or hybrid Azure Active Directory joined devices. Which basically just means that as an organization, you've decided that those types of devices have been whitelisted and further prompts, stepped-up authentication will not be necessary, whereas somebody coming in from a personal device trying to access information would be prompted for that stepped-up authentication with MFA as an example. Conditional access gives you the power to enforce the core principle of zero trust, which is never trust, always verify. We know the zero trust security model relies on a security policy engine to make access decisions that you can enforce throughout the digital estate. And conditional access gives you the ability to fine-tune those policies based on, again, contextual user, device, location, and also the session risk information, giving you better control. We're seeing too, Microsoft has enabled recently for customers that perhaps may not have a premium license and are just using Azure AD for Office 365 as part of their Office 365 licensing SKU without conditional access to enable the security defaults. And those security defaults, while not conditional access, still provide that security by making sure that MFA is enforced for all of your users. And also by blocking legacy authentication. Things such as SMTP, IMAP, POP, protocols that do not recognize MFA and therefore are very subject to data breach. We know that passwords are the weakest link in the security chain and a single point of failure without any additional verification. And that's why we believe strongly that if you do one thing to help your environment is you should turn on MFA. Haven't done that yet, please do that today. MFA is known to prevent 99.9% of identity attacks in the environment. Also coming on the horizon, of course, is passwordless methods that help make MFA more secure. And while not all MFA is passwordless just yet, these particular technologies, for instance, the Microsoft Authenticator app, Windows Hello for Business, FIDO2 security keys that are being made by a number of different partners, and of course, biometrics such as fingerprint and face scan, all provide a passwordless form of authentication, which is supported by Azure AD. That in addition to hardware, one-time password type tokens, soft tokens, push notification, and while less secure, still an option for some, especially perhaps in retail, manufacturing, where you have first-line workers or people that are on a distribution center or a plant floor that may not have a smartphone convenient to them, or maybe in a location where that type of signal just does not get through. Of course, there's still SMS and voice that can be used as that second factor of authentication. For those that may be hesitant to turn on MFA, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can minimize the disruption and make that transition smooth for your users. And conditional access policies allow you to do that. You can stage them, you can slowly roll it out to your users, help them get registered. And again, those deployment plans that you'll see at the end of the presentation can show you how you can do that. With Azure Active Directory, conditional access policies, and MFA, these organizations saw a significant improvement in their organization's ability to prevent, detect, and quickly remediate specific types of attacks. The organization's interviews reference specific attacks like legacy authentication that they were able to prevent through the use of Azure AD's MFA and also the real-time security logs, such as the sign-in and audit logs that Azure AD makes available, which can also be sent to your SIM to provide further analysis and detection capabilities. By deploying Azure AD for identity and access management and enabling both SSO and MFA, the composite organization significantly improved its IAM maturity and reduced its risk exposure. And this benefit ramps up over time as the organization integrates more applications and integrates more applications with Azure AD. Based on the numbers, one potential cost of data breach is valued at over $17 million per year, and this model was used for a 3-year basis, and the average likelihood of a data breach was estimated to be almost about 15%. An organization could see a total risk-adjusted present value of $2.2 million in savings. And finally, we'll talk about some of the IT efficiency gains that are you can benefit from. Of course, in identity, we talk about the joiner, mover, leave process, which can be difficult to manage. Many organizations struggle with the onboarding and offboarding of their users. Some other organizations saying that it could take them weeks, a couple of weeks, in order to onboard a user because there are multiple forms to fill out. There's different hurdles to jump through. A user's device may not be provisioned right away. Applications may need to get provisioned separately. Just a lot of moving parts. Azure AD can help simplify that. Now with the ability to connect directly to several cloud-based HR systems such as Workday, SuccessFactors, and Oracle HCM, where you can provision users directly into Azure Active Directory, or even directly down to Active Directory, which can then be synced back into your Azure Active Directory tenant if you're still mastering your users on-prem or need to have them in Active Directory, as many organizations still do. That can greatly improve that identity lifecycle. Organizations that have adopted this model were able to automate device provisioning and onboarding for new employees, for partners, and customers, and also manage transfers in the process, which is also very important to avoid the scope creep that may come up as users move within different departments, but their access is not removed from where they were to where they're going, and they continue to build access in their identity that they should not have. In addition to onboarding organizations, of course, another benefit is the ability to quickly and effectively offboard an employee who leaves the company or is terminated, representing an improvement in organizational security posture. And with Azure Active Directory, as soon as an employee is terminated in the system, Azure AD can push that status and remove access to all applications and services immediately. The access lifecycle, again, while employees are are onboarded. Now with entitlement management and governance built into Azure Active Directory, you're able to set up systems where you can review access rights over time and provide that identity governance. Making sure that users have only the access that they need to the resources that they need at any given time, and also allow for an orchestrated and repeatable campaign so that they can review that access on a regular basis. That access can be both revoked or approved based on a workflow model and revised as needed. And there's also now the ability within identity governance. Again, it's an Azure AD premium feature, but that identity governance also applies to admin privileges. Oftentimes we're seeing breaches occur because there are too many global admins in the environment or too many privileged accounts. And once one of those accounts gets compromised, then it becomes a really big problem, because at that point the attacker can just laterally move within the environment and gain access to whatever resources that they need. With privileged identity management as part of Azure AD, you're able to enforce on-demand, just-in-time administrative access when needed, ensure that policies are met with alerts, audit reports, and access reviews, and manage admin access in Azure AD and also in Azure RBAC as well for your IaaS environments. This is a very, very important feature. We often talk to our customers. This is usually one place where we start, where we try to reduce the number of full-time admin accounts in the environment and reduce it to a number that is both manageable and that is going to improve their security, but at the same time, give those users that need admin privileges within the environment the right role so that they can activate it as needed. With these IT efficiency gains, the paper found that there was about a $3 million 3-year benefit that was realized just from some of these IT efficiencies, where essentially because identity was consolidated on a single platform, the number of users, the number of admins that were necessary to manage that environment was scaled down from three, four, or five to potentially just one person, and people could be moved to other areas where they could be needed and be more productive. So to wrap up, a couple of kind of go-dos. You want to review your current identity landscape and ask yourself, are there redundancies? Are you using for instance, third-party identity provider solution that may be doing the same thing that Azure AD can do, especially if you are currently leveraging any Microsoft 365 E3, E5 plans, or have Azure Active Directory Premium in the environment. You may be paying for the same solution twice. Ask yourself also, what is the current user experience? Do they have multiple identities, credential pairs for application access? And how is that access governed? And one project I worked with a large global company, that was their main driver, I should say second main driver, their first being cost, but it was to improve the user experience. They had a lot of first-line workers, remote sales force that needed to access applications from their mobile devices, and having a federated solution with a third-party competitor IDaaS solution was just making that difficult. Consolidating to Azure AD really streamlined the process for them, their sign-on process, and they were much more productive. Also review your application portfolio and begin that rationalization process of determining which applications can you start migrating and connecting to Azure AD, which ones you may need to deprecate, and your legacy applications as well, which ones could benefit by being put behind Azure Active Directory, eliminating the need for your VPNs and protecting those on-premise applications with the security features of Azure Active Directory, like conditional access, MFA, and of course single sign-on. And if you're using Azure AD for Microsoft 365, please enable MFA. That's be my last bit of advice. Some resources for you. So we do have, as a partner, we work with Microsoft's customers and our mutual customers around these Microsoft 365 accelerator workshops. There's workshops for identity, security, compliance, and endpoint management. These workshops are structured in such a way to give you more information about the solutions, where that be identity and Azure AD, and how to start that deployment process and the application rationalization. They're structured in about 3 days, but 3 days across several weeks to give your teams time to digest the information and come up with a game plan for how to deploy the solution in your environment. So you can contact us at info@oxfordcomputergroup.com, or you can speak to your Microsoft rep who can put you in touch with us to help accelerate that workshop. The Azure AD deployment plans that I mentioned before, you can find them at aka.ms Azure AD deployment plan. These will show you how to start deploying some of these solutions. There's content available, end user communication for in emails, email templates, posters, things that you can put up around the office to help people know what's coming down the pipe in terms of the deployment of these technologies. So I encourage you to take a look at that. There's a Microsoft Ignite 2020 session that was released in September at Ignite 2020, entitled "Save Money by Securing Access to All Your Apps with Azure Active Directory," and I believe the links will be also in the chat. And then finally, 5 steps for integrating your apps, another Microsoft doc that can help you with how to integrate applications with Azure AD that you may have in your environment. Again, it's been a pleasure being with you today. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. And at this point, we can entertain some questions if there are any from the audience.
Great. Thank you, Frank. I think we are set. The answers, I think we've got some questions in there that have been addressed. We've got all our links in there for you. We want to thank everyone, and thank you, Frank, for a great presentation. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And this concludes today's webinar, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.